and welcome to Early Years TV with me, Kathy Brodie. Today we're talking to the highly inspirational Neil Leitch, who is the Chief Executive of the Preschool Learning Alliance, the largest and most representative early years membership organisation in England, based in London and supported by a network of service hubs across the country. Neil is frequently on national TV and in the newspapers, giving a strong, clear voice to the early years sectors on the issues that have huge and often very negative effect on practitioners and educators working in the early years, such as the 30 hours funding. He also works tirelessly behind the scenes at government level with policymakers and influencers, representing the views and concerns of the 14,000 Alliance members. A very warm welcome to Early Years TV, Neil Leitch.
Hi Kathy, lovely to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for taking time out to come and speak to us today. I know that you've got an incredibly busy schedule. So, shall we start right in the beginning? How did you get to be so influential in the early years sectors? Tell me your story.
Well, I confess I feel slightly uncomfortable when people say that I'm influential because A, I'm slightly embarrassed, and secondly, I think the reality is it's the sector that's given me the strength, I suppose, to speak out, and also the Alliance in its own right. You know, we have lots and lots of members, and I'm surrounded by really smart, bright, confident individuals. So, you know, really, I guess the praise should go to all of those colleagues. But I also believe that, you know, if you do the right thing, then you can be confident and you won't fail. If fundamentally you're trying to please politicians, you're worried about your funding, you then send out mixed messages. And I come from a completely different background. I confess I'm not an academic. I have a position where I was in commerce business, and perhaps the fact that I don't have, if you like, the history, the protocol, the niceties of having to do the right thing with politicians and policy formers, that I sort of ignore all that. I'm no respecter of persons. Everybody is equal to me. And I think that probably helps me in terms of trying to put forward arguments. The other thing is that from a personal point of view, so that's more of the corporate side of things. From a personal point of view, I came from a single parent family. I was fortunate enough to have an absolutely wonderful mother. My father was not a very nice individual, an alcoholic who was violent towards my mum. We ended up in children's homes. And I think that gave me fundamentally a sort of cause. I've always detested inequality. I've always detested anybody that takes advantage over anybody else. So therefore, if I see a wrongdoing, I was told that I should sit back and, you know, if I'm on a train and something's happening and I'm uncomfortable with it, my colleagues say, well, just let it go. I find that very difficult. So perhaps that's helped me in terms of, if you like, trying to speak out for the right reasons and for the right people.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that comes through really clearly that you're not sort of doing it to climb the political ladder. You are there to fight for people who maybe don't have a voice, who don't have a very loud voice. And I think that comes through when you do TV interviews and when you write in the newspapers and so on, that you are there on the right, it is so refreshing. And as you say, maybe it is the background, maybe it's just the way that you're made up, but it is very, very refreshing in a sector such as the early years sector. So let's have a look at specifics just for a minute here. What do you think your proudest achievement is to date, either in terms of policies or changing the minds of influencers? What is it that you're proudest of?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, because I think when you feel like you're banging your head against the wall every single day, you can easily lose sight of what success looks like. And I think over the recent years, you know, there's been a lot of lobbying, a lot of campaigning, but we have had some success. And there's probably 2.5 things, and I'll talk about the half in a second, that stick out to me in terms of major achievements. The first was the proposal that came forward to change the ratios. And, you know, at that particular point in time, it was a proposal that was based on trying to get more money into the system. And you would think that, you know, the opportunity to take on another 60% of children without any additional cost, many providers would be rushing to their front doors, opening them up, thinking, here we go, more revenue coming in. And I was absolutely shored up by the fact that the sector itself, not politicians, no one else, the sector itself said, not in our name. Yeah. And so we battled. I remember having conversations. I remember with the Deputy Prime Minister, spoke alongside him on one occasion, fell out with him. By the time I got back to the office, there were phone calls saying, well, you really can't be saying those sort of things, Neil. And yet the ratio argument was overturned. We won. And so I think, and I do think back now, and I wonder what things would be like if we'd lost that particular position. So when people say to me, the sector is about self-preservation, about making more money, we were the ones that came out and said we could make more money, but not in our name. So that certainly, I think, was an important stage. And I also, if I may say so, Kathy, I think the Alliance, along with other colleagues, but we really took a strong stance in that. And I think we stuck our neck out, really. We paid the penalty for that. We lost some funding. We fell out with government, but it was definitely the right thing to do. So that's certainly one that sticks out with me. I think the other thing that we are obviously constantly having to campaign and lobby for is funding. And whilst we're in a pretty difficult position, and I certainly wouldn't say that we're anywhere near achieving the objectives, I do think that when we launched the CEDA report, counting the costs, despite the fact that within half an hour of actually launching that report, the minister said it was headline grabbing and without substance, etc. I think we made a difference. And there would have been no funding review had we not actually have produced that work. As I say, we haven't gone far enough, but it was at least the first step. And I'm always gratified to sort of come from a position where it was criticised by government, and then it was quoted within their own report. So, at least we stood the test of time in that respect. And I think the half, when I refer to the other half, that probably is baseline assessment. I remember again standing up, arguing the case when all the proposals were put forward for these predominantly tablet-based assessments to take place. I think we made as a sector a really strong case. And the reality was that it was shelved periodically. And of course, the reason I say half is because here we go again. We're back onto the same old thing. And I seriously wish that politicians would listen to people who know what they do. I mean, politicians move. I think we've had something like 5 early years ministers in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And yet we've got people who've given 10, 20, 30 years of their lives. I know which one I would rely on. I wouldn't ask a butcher to value my home, and I wouldn't ask a valuer to tell me the best joint of meat to eat, etc., etc. Why would I rely on a politician to tell me what's best for the interest of the child?
Yeah.
So they're my 2.5.
And the baseline one, of course, is still ongoing. And very sadly, I'm seeing around the world as well that the testing of very young children, in the idea that you can then draw some useful information from those tests, that's a global problem. And that's not just in England, obviously. So I think that is still a case worth fighting for. So I'm assuming that you will still be pushing forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Those are massive things. These are things at policy level. These, as you say, you're talking to the government, the highest echelons in the government, and really making a difference. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a typical practitioner or educator, watching this video now, just sort of thinking, well, that's all right for you. You're the CEO of a massive company. If anywhere in the world, say, let's make it really difficult, how could practitioners and educators get their voice heard out there? How can they get their views across at that kind of level?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is don't be fooled into thinking that it's all evidence-based and it's all about logic, because there are enough cases to show that even when you push into the face of policy formers the reality, the evidence, if it doesn't suit them, they will completely ignore it. What I would suggest is probably more powerful than evidence is, if you like, votes and press. It was the thing, for example, if you think about the 30 hours policy that we have at this particular point in time, the evidence before this was launched without trying to be too political, but by the current government, before it was launched, just a few months before, the then minister who's still a minister within the current government, said to the House of Lords Affordable Childcare Committee, when Labour was suggesting that we should move from 15 hours to 25 hours, not 30, he said that is not in the best interest of the child. Also, do you know how much that would cost? At least £1.5 billion. And yet, somehow, they managed to deliver another 33% additional hours, moving it from another 10 to 15 hours, for 2/3 of the money. It's fantastic. I love these economists who are able to do these sorts of things. So there was the evidence with government that this was not financially viable, etc., etc. But just 2 weeks before, three weeks, I think it was actually, before the election, lo and behold, the current government announced we're going to increase these hours. And now we are left to sort things out. So my argument would be, so that was it, that was all about getting votes. That was all about trying to get the press to come on board and if you like, send a message out, the media, to send a message out to get voters. And I would suggest that the way to undo all of that is to do exactly the same thing, is to be articulate with the press, get them on board, whether it's your local press, it doesn't have to be a national newspaper. I can tell you firsthand that we a local situation, we will lobby local politicians, etc., etc. We will get absolutely ignored. When a parent knocks on their door and says, I've got a major problem, all of a sudden I'm receiving letters left, right and centre from politicians who have taken an interest. When the local press are about to write a story within the local paper, I'm contacted by politicians. So I would say, forget the logic, get parents on board, get the press and media on board. And it's not about, the size of the organisation, it's about the importance of your message. Yeah. And real messages count. It's not about corporate messages, it's about real life. And that's why I think, actually the power of the local practitioner is quite enormous.
Yeah. I think that's such brilliant advice, and I can imagine that if you're in a setting, you got all the parents together and that you did lobby the local paper, and let's be honest, a lot of local papers are very happy to come out and take photos of children playing and put a story to that. It makes a lovely press, doesn't it?
Right.
And to get parents on board, that is such great advice. And as you say, these are voters as well, aren't they? So you might have 10 practitioners in a setting, but you might have 100 children, mightn't you? And that's maybe 200 parents. So suddenly those numbers start to grow, don't they?
I remember when we were, right in the middle of the ratio debate, that the turning point for me was when we got a telephone call from The Guardian that said, we have got Justine Roberts from, not Mumsnet. And when Justine Roberts came on board, all of a sudden, government started to listen, because parents now were saying, not in our name either. So, the power of parents, I think, is phenomenal.
Yeah. And I do think having that joined up thinking as well, everybody together, because although the 30 hours in England is the idea that parents get 30 free hours, we know that in fact it's subsidised by the setting. But parents don't always know that. They believe what they see and they say, well, it's 3 hours. So maybe educating parents as well and telling them what's actually happening out there.
Yeah, I think we're at a different place from where we were probably 7 or 8 years ago, when, frankly, we were hounded by the press, greedy providers, etc., etc. Now and again, it still happens, but it's quite rare. The reality is, I think most people are well aware that the sector is grossly underfunded, and that, when you talk to parents, when they interview parents themselves say, we like this. Of course, this is a great policy, but our local setting is struggling, and therefore we feel they should be paid more money. So, the power of togetherness, I think, is quite important as well. And we saw that in York, where all the providers came together when government were looking to launch the 30 hours. And they said, unless you pay us more money, not a single one of us basically is going to deliver these 30 hours. Lo and behold, in just a few days, there was a review of the funding level. Do you think that would have come unless they had been together? Because I doubt it very much.
So obviously there is power in numbers, isn't there? That sort of grouping, that coming together with that common voice. So in addition, obviously, to joining the Preschool Learning Alliance in England, obviously, what other membership organisations, what other suggestions would you have for people to be able to come together to have that unified voice for politicians and influencers?
Well, I think one of the things that we try and do is we have local, if you like, meetings and gatherings, and I do believe that, you know, effective communication is absolutely critical. I would also suggest that, you know, I mean, we're running a campaign at the moment called, and I guess I would say this, Kathy, but Fair Future Funding. The more people that get together, the more people that put their name to this, the more people that we basically can put into the face of policy formers and funders and say, you need to sort this out. Because when you get to volumes, of course, that starts to have some influence as well. So I certainly would say that, you know, keep in touch with the Alliance. I would struggle to, of course I would, to recommend any other organisation. Of course I would. But the reality is, you know, I think we have a track history. We've stuck our neck out. I'd like to think that we lead, and it sounds slightly hackneyed, but others tend to follow. The ratio debate, you know, we jeopardised our position, but we didn't think about, you know, government money. We did what was right, and we do that in just about every area. So, you know, I guess I would implore people to come on with an organisation which is, you know, at its heart, it has providers and, just as importantly, families and children.
Yes, and I think that's really important. So for practitioners and educators elsewhere in the world, maybe do have a look at those organisations and see what sort of language they're using on their website and whether families and children are at the heart of it, because that's really evident on the Alliance site, especially, I feel. So that's really, really good advice. Thank you very much indeed. So Neil, given a magic wand, what would you most like to see changed in the early years sector, whether that's in the UK or whether that's abroad? What's the one thing you would like to see changed?
Well, I think that, if I may, I have a couple of things that, from a practical point of view, I would like to see change. But I think there's an overarching position that needs to change, and that is, I think we need some integrity and honesty, and we need co-production. I recall when the coalition government came into office that they produced this particular document which had right the way through it, and I'm struggling for the name of the document at this point in time, I'm sorry, but right the way through the document it talked about co-production, and I remember the quote, not just for the now but for the long term. Yeah. And it was critical. And so we started to, and these co-production groups were formed, and we started to engage with government. So there was, if you like, a common purpose to do what's in the best interest of families and children. Yeah. And very quickly, as soon as there was, if you like, a difference of opinion, those co-production groups were disbanded. And I think that was absolutely tragic, because what you then end up with is you end up with debate through the back door, or through the press and the media. I recall one DfE official who is no longer there, so I think I can comfortably say this, because I would, you know, confidence is absolutely critical in life. But I remember that she was excluding us from a variety of statements and information, and we had a conversation, and I said to her, well, you know, we are the largest organisation representing providers out there. Why wouldn't you want to talk to us? And she said, well, because Neil, you never send out positive messages about government, and the reality is, you know, wouldn't you still want to listen to the biggest organisation that represents the biggest group of providers out there? Because that's absolutely critical. But it demonstrated, if we don't like your message, then we'll switch off. Whether it's right or wrong, we just won't talk to you. So I said to her, well, we can have these debates, but we can have these debates on, you know, on the television, through reporters in the newspaper, and I guarantee you that the reality will be that you will be on the end of basically criticism rather than being able to engage. Now, you know, why wouldn't you want to do that? So integrity, honesty, co-production, I would suggest, would resolve many, many of the issues. The practical things I would say is that we need to stop looking at sort of spreadsheets and government thinking about sending more predominantly mums back into the working environment when the child doesn't even get a mention in terms of what's in the best interest of the child. We seem to have lost all of that. I spoke a couple of weeks ago at the Finnish embassy. They had about maybe 50 or 60 people there. Many people had come across from Finland. And one of the questions that I was asked was, you know, what is it you would take from the English system that we could basically take back to Finland. And I absolutely struggled. What I did say was that if you want to demotivate your workforce and do things on the cheap, then I think we have a fantastic model. But the reality is in Finland, where they get obviously excellent results, they don't push their children. They have the children at the centre. They have the family at the centre. And the economics, although I confess that they are struggling in this area, tend to be the second and third tier factor. We do the opposite. So I would suggest, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be two things. Engage with the sector, truly engage. Don't give us rhetoric, engage. And the second thing would be, put the child at the heart of your policies, and then I think your policies would be quite sensible. And bold beginnings and baseline assessment is not the answer.
Yeah. Well, that's a really strong message. I knew you would have a really strong message. Thank you so much. Yes, I think being asked by Finland what they could take from England, I think I would struggle too. So, but it is interesting that things like the 30 hours was very much about parents rather than children. So that's such a lovely message to put out there. And that is what we all come into childcare for, because we love being with children and we want the very best for our children, don't we? So I think that's hugely inspirational. Thank you very, very much indeed. So we've talked already about the Alliance. How can people find out more? How can they come and have a look to see what it is that you're doing in England at the moment?
Well, certainly, I would say that the sort of first port of call would be our website. So that's pre-school.org.uk. And we're a membership organisation for everybody. Whether you're a childminder, a large sort of group provider in terms of multiple settings, or a single site provider, in a local church. We're there for the entire sector. So by all means, we would love people to come on board and join us.
And I do know that you go into reception as well, because I was in a reception class and a teacher was saying to me about how much she relied on some of the things you've got on there. So you'll find the link to the website there underneath the video now, so you can click right through and have a look at that and see what I mean about having the child at the heart of the Preschool Learning Alliance. I think it's very clear on there. Neil Leitch, thank you so much for joining us today on Early Years TV. It has just been fantastic being able to talk to you and hear about all the wonderful things that you're doing for the early years sector. And I know that practitioners and educators around the world will be able to take lots of top tips away from that. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today on Early Years TV.
Thank you, Kathy. And as always, it's a delight to talk to you. You always put me at ease, so thank you.
You're very welcome. And do join us next week for the next episode of Early Years TV.